Sarah Mitchell pressed her face against the car window as they drove up the winding mountain road. The tall pine trees lined both sides of the narrow path, and she could smell the fresh mountain air even with the windows rolled up. Her husband Tom gripped the steering wheel tightly as they navigated the curves, but his face showed pure excitement. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with wonder. They had talked about buying a mountain cabin for years, but it always seemed like an impossible dream. Tom worked as an accountant at a small firm in the city, and Sarah taught third grade at the local elementary school. Neither of them made much money, but they had saved every penny they could for the past 3 years. The real estate agent, Mrs. Henderson, had called them just 2 weeks ago. "I have something special," she had said over the phone. "It's been on the market for only 3 days, and I think you two would love it." Sarah and Tom had driven up that very weekend to take a look, and they knew immediately that this was their dream home. Now, as they pulled into the gravel driveway of their new cabin, Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. The small wooden structure sat perfectly among the trees, with a green metal roof and a wraparound porch that begged for rocking chairs and morning coffee. The cabin was painted a warm brown color that blended beautifully with the forest around it. Tom turned off the engine and they sat in silence for a moment, just staring at their new home. 3 years of eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch was worth it, he said with a laugh. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. They had sacrificed so much to save for this place. While their friends went out to restaurants and took vacations, Sarah and Tom had stayed home and saved every dollar. Sarah had started tutoring kids after school to earn extra money, and Tom had taken on weekend work doing taxes for neighbors. They had sold Sarah's car and shared Tom's old Honda. They had even moved to a smaller apartment to cut their rent in half. The cabin itself was modest, but perfect for their needs. It had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen, and a cozy living room with a stone fireplace. The best part was the half-acre lot it sat on. A small creek ran along the back of the property, creating a peaceful soundtrack of flowing water. Ancient oak trees provided shade, and wildflowers grew naturally throughout the yard. "Come on," Tom said, opening his car door. "Let's go look at our new home." They walked slowly around the property, taking in every detail. The previous owners had taken good care of the place. The deck was solid and had been recently stained. The roof looked new, and all the windows had been replaced with energy-efficient ones. Inside, the hardwood floors gleamed, and the kitchen appliances, while not fancy, were clean and functional. Sarah opened the back door and stepped onto the small porch that overlooked the creek. The sound of the water was even more beautiful than she remembered from their first visit. Birds chirped in the trees and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. "It's like our own private paradise," she said. Tom joined her on the porch and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I love you, Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "and I love our new cabin." They spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking the few things they had brought with them. Sarah hung curtains in the bedroom windows while Tom set up their small television in the living room. They had decided to keep the cabin simply furnished. A comfortable couch, a dining table with 2 chairs, and a bed were really all they needed. As evening approached, they decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to meet their new neighbors. The Pine Ridge Mountain community was home to about 200 families, most of whom only used their cabins on weekends and during vacations. The community had paved roads, streetlights, and even a small clubhouse near the entrance. Their first stop was the cabin next door, where they met Bob and Linda Peterson. The elderly couple had owned their cabin for 15 years and were thrilled to meet the young newcomers. "We're so glad to have year-round neighbors," Linda said, offering them fresh-baked cookies. "Most of the folks here only come up on weekends. It gets a bit lonely sometimes." Bob nodded in agreement. "You picked a great time to buy. Spring is beautiful here and summer is even better. Just wait until you see the wildflowers bloom next month." The Petersons told them about the community's monthly potluck dinners and the annual 4th of July celebration. "Everyone's pretty friendly here," Bob explained. "The HOA keeps things nice and tidy, and we all look out for each other." Sarah and Tom learned that the Homeowners Association was run by a small board of residents who lived in the community full-time. The monthly fees were reasonable, and the money went toward maintaining the roads, the clubhouse, and the common areas. "The HOA president is Maggie Thornfield," Linda mentioned. "She lives in that big house at the top of the hill. She's been running things here for quite a while now. Very organized woman." As they continued their walk, Sarah and Tom met several other neighbors. Everyone seemed welcoming and friendly. An older man named Mr. Garcia showed them the best fishing spots along the main creek that ran through the community. A woman named Jennifer, who was about Sarah's age, invited them to join the community book club. "I think we're going to love it here," Sarah told Tom as they walked back to their cabin under the starry mountain sky. The air was crisp and clean, so different from the city air they were used to breathing. That night, they built their first fire in the stone fireplace and cuddled on the couch, listening to the sounds of the mountain night. Owls hooted in the distance and the creek continued its gentle babbling. Sarah felt a peace she had never experienced before. "Thank you," she whispered to Tom. "For what?" "For working so hard to make this dream come true. For all those peanut butter sandwiches and long work hours. For believing we could actually do this." Tom kissed the top of her head. "We did it together," he said. "This is just the beginning of our new life." Neither of them could have imagined that their peaceful mountain paradise would soon become the center of a nightmare that would test everything they believed about community justice and the power of standing up for what's right. For now, though, they were simply two people in love, sitting in front of their own fireplace in their own cabin, dreaming about all the wonderful weekends and memories they would create in their mountain retreat. The crackling fire slowly died down, and they headed to bed, excited about waking up in their new home for the first time. Tomorrow they would start making this cabin truly theirs. Margaret Thornfield stood at her kitchen window, watching the young couple unpack boxes from their small Honda. Her house sat at the highest point in Pine Ridge Mountain community, giving her a perfect view of most of the neighborhood below. The large 3-story home was twice the size of any other cabin in the community, with expensive stonework and custom cedar siding that had cost more than most people made in a year. Margaret, who insisted everyone call her Maggie, had moved to Pine Ridge 12 years ago after her divorce from a successful businessman. The settlement had left her wealthy enough to buy the biggest lot in the community and build her dream house. What started as a peaceful retirement quickly turned into her personal mission to control every aspect of life in Pine Ridge. She had been elected HOA president in her second year and had won every election since. Most residents didn't bother to vote or even attend the meetings, which suited Maggie perfectly. It gave her the power to run things exactly as she saw fit. "Derek," she called to her son, who was sprawled on the living room couch watching television. "Come look at the new people." Derek Thornfield dragged himself off the couch and joined his mother at the window. At 28 years old, he was a tall, thin man with greasy brown hair that he rarely bothered to wash. He had been living with his mother for 2 years, ever since his third drunk driving arrest had cost him his job, his apartment, and his driver's license. "They look young," Derek said, pressing his face against the glass. "And that cabin they bought is really nice. Way nicer than this dump I'm stuck in." Derek lived in the converted basement of his mother's house. While it was larger than most apartments, he hated everything about his situation. He couldn't drive anywhere because of his suspended license. He couldn't afford his own place because he couldn't keep a job. Most of his old friends had stopped talking to him after his last arrest, when he had crashed his car into a neighbor's fence while driving drunk. "That's the Morrison cabin," Maggie said, adjusting her reading glasses to get a better look. "Old Mr. Morrison died last year and his kids finally sold it. I heard it went for quite a bit of money." Derek watched as the young man carried a box marked kitchen stuff up the front steps. "How can people that young afford a place like that? I've been looking at cabins for months and everything decent costs way more than I can afford." "Some people get lucky," Maggie said with a frown. "Others work hard their whole lives and still struggle." This wasn't exactly true. Derek had never worked particularly hard at anything. He had dropped out of college after 2 years of partying instead of studying. Since then, he had bounced from job to job, usually getting fired for showing up late, calling in sick too often, or arguing with his bosses. His mother had been supporting him financially for years, even before he moved back in with her. "I should go introduce myself," Maggie said, smoothing down her gray hair. "As HOA president, it's my job to welcome new residents and make sure they understand the community rules." Derek perked up at this idea. "Can I come with you? I'd like to meet them too." 20 minutes later, Maggie and Derek walked down the hill toward the Mitchell's cabin. Maggie carried a folder full of HOA documents and community rules. She believed in being thorough when it came to educating new residents about their responsibilities. Tom was on the porch hanging a small wind chime when they approached. "Hello there," he called out with a friendly smile. You must be our neighbors. I'm Margaret Thornfield, the president of the Pine Ridge HOA, Maggie announced in her most official voice. And this is my son, Derek. We wanted to welcome you to our community. Sarah appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. How nice of you to stop by. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is my husband, Tom. We're so excited to be here. I have some important documents for you, Maggie said, opening her folder. Community rules, regulations, architectural guidelines, and landscaping requirements. It's crucial that all residents understand and follow these policies. Tom took the thick stack of papers and flipped through them quickly. There seemed to be rules about everything from what color mailboxes were allowed to, how high grass could grow before it had to be cut. Wow, this is very detailed, he said. We'll definitely read through all of this. Derek had been quiet during the introductions, but he was studying every detail of the cabin and property. The place was much nicer than he had expected. The deck was solid and well built. The windows were new. Even the landscaping looked professionally done. This is a really nice setup you have here, Derek said, walking around the side of the cabin to get a better look at the backyard. Must have cost a pretty penny. We saved for 3 years, Sarah said proudly. It was worth every sacrifice. 3 years? Derek repeated. You must have really good jobs to save that much money so fast. Tom and Sarah exchanged a quick look. Derek's tone sounded slightly accusatory, as if he didn't believe they could have earned the money honestly. We're both teachers, Tom explained. We just worked hard and saved every dollar we could. Teachers? Derek laughed. My mom used to be a teacher before she got married. They don't make much money. How did you really afford this place? Maggie shot her son a warning look, but she was also curious about the answer. In her experience, young people who could afford expensive mountain cabins usually came from wealthy families or had high-paying jobs in technology or finance. We made sacrifices, Sarah said, her voice cooling slightly. We drove one car, lived in a small apartment, and saved every penny we could. We also worked extra jobs in the evenings and weekends. That's very admirable, Maggie said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. I hope you'll find our community standards to be reasonable. We work very hard to maintain property values and keep Pine Ridge looking its best. She launched into a detailed explanation of the most important rules. Trash cans could only be put out the night before pickup day and had to be brought in by evening. Cars couldn't be parked on the street overnight. No loud music or parties after 10 o'clock. Lawn furniture had to be made of approved materials and colors. We also have monthly inspections, Maggie continued. I personally walk through the community to make sure everyone is following the guidelines. Any violations are documented and residents receive written notices. Derek was only half listening to his mother's speech. He was imagining what it would be like to live in this cabin instead of his mother's basement. He could have friends over without his mother complaining about the noise. He could cook his own meals instead of eating whatever she prepared. He could have some independence for the first time in years. The property looks great, he interrupted. Really well maintained. The previous owners must have taken good care of it. They did, Tom agreed. We were lucky to find a place in such good condition. Lucky, Derek repeated quietly. The word bothered him more than it should have. He didn't feel lucky at all. Here were 2 people his age or younger, living in a beautiful cabin that he could never afford, while he was stuck in his mother's basement like a teenager. As they prepared to leave, Maggie handed Sarah her business card. If you have any questions about the community or need to report any problems, don't hesitate to call me. I take my responsibilities as HOA president very seriously. Thank you, Sarah said. Everyone we've met has been so welcoming. Walking back up the hill to their house, Derek was unusually quiet. Maggie noticed his mood and asked what was wrong. It just doesn't seem fair, he said finally. They're younger than me. They have better jobs than I could ever get, and they can afford to buy a cabin like that while I can't even afford my own apartment. Life isn't always fair, Derek, his mother replied. But maybe this will motivate you to work harder and improve your situation. Derek didn't respond, but he was already forming different ideas about how to improve his situation. That cabin would be perfect for him, and he was beginning to think that people who got lucky didn't always deserve to keep their luck. Sarah was arranging flowers in a vase on their kitchen table when she heard footsteps on their front porch. Through the window, she could see a woman in a dark blue business suit taking photos of their front door with her phone. The woman was writing something on a clipboard while she took the pictures. "Tom," Sarah called to her husband, who was reading in the living room. "There's someone taking pictures of our house." Tom joined her at the window just as the woman knocked on their door. It was Margaret Thornfield, but she looked much more serious than she had during their friendly introduction 2 weeks earlier. "Good morning, Mrs. Mitchell," Maggie said when Sarah opened the door. Her voice was cold and professional. "I'm here on official HOA business. I need to document a violation of community standards." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "A violation? What kind of violation?" Maggie consulted her clipboard and read from it like she was reciting legal documents. Section 4.2 of the Pine Ridge Community Guidelines states that all exterior doormats must be in earth tones that complement the natural mountain environment. "Your doormat is burgundy, which is not an approved color." Sarah looked down at the welcome mat Tom had bought at the hardware store in town. It was a simple burgundy mat with "Welcome" written in gold letters. It had cost $12 and looked perfectly normal to her. "I don't understand," Sarah said. "It's just a doormat. And it is an earth tone, isn't it? Burgundy is like a dark red-brown." "The approved earth tones are specifically listed in the guidelines," Maggie replied, not bothering to hide her irritation. "Brown, tan, forest green, and dark gray. Burgundy is not on the approved list. You have 7 days to replace it with an appropriate mat, or you will be fined $50. Sarah took the official violation notice that Maggie handed her. The paper looked very official with the Pine Ridge HOA letterhead and Maggie's signature at the bottom. "Mrs. Thornfield, I really think this is being a bit too strict," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's a very small thing and the mat doesn't look bad at all." "Rules are rules, Mrs. Mitchell. If we make exceptions for one resident, then everyone will expect special treatment. I'm sure you understand." After Maggie left, Sarah showed the violation notice to Tom. He read it twice, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is crazy," he said. "We've been here 2 weeks and we're already in trouble for a doormat?" "Maybe it's just a misunderstanding," Sarah said, though she was starting to feel uneasy about their new community. "I'll buy a brown mat tomorrow and we'll forget about it." But forgetting about it turned out to be impossible. 3 days later, another violation notice appeared on their door. This time the problem was their bird feeder. "Unauthorized feeding of wildlife," Tom read aloud from the notice. "Section 7.8 prohibits residents from engaging in any activities that might attract bears, raccoons, or other potentially dangerous animals to residential areas." Sarah loved watching the small songbirds that came to their feeder every morning. Cardinals, blue jays, and tiny chickadees had become part of her daily routine. She would drink her coffee on the porch and watch them eat the seeds she put out. "It's just a bird feeder," she said. "How could that possibly be dangerous?" The violation notice explained that bird feeders could attract larger animals who might smell the seeds and come looking for food. The fine for this violation was $75 if the bird feeder wasn't removed within 5 days. Tom was getting angry. "I'm going to call her and talk about this. This is getting ridiculous." But when Tom called Maggie's number, she was not interested in discussing the violations. "Mr. Mitchell, I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. These guidelines have been in place for years, and they exist to protect everyone in the community." "But Mrs. Peterson next door has a bird feeder too," Tom pointed out. "I can see it from our kitchen window. If you'd like to report violations by other residents, I'll be happy to investigate," Maggie replied in a voice that made it clear she didn't appreciate being questioned. The next week brought another violation notice. This time Tom's car was improperly parked. According to the notice, his Honda was parked 3 inches too far from the curb, violating the community's parking guidelines. Sarah measured the distance from their car to the curb with a tape measure. The car was exactly where it had been parked since the day they moved in, and it looked perfectly normal to her. When she looked at other cars parked along their street, several of them appeared to be parked exactly the same way. "She's targeting us," Tom said, crumpling up the latest violation notice. "There's no way she's measuring every single car in the neighborhood with this level of detail." The violations kept coming. The next week it was their garden hose, which was improperly stored because it wasn't wound up neatly enough on their hose reel. The week after that, they were cited for excessive noise because Tom had used their lawnmower at 9:30 in the morning on a Saturday, which was apparently 30 minutes before the approved time for lawn care activities. Each violation came with increasing fines. The doormat had been $50. The bird feeder was $75. The parking issue was $100. By the end of their second month in Pine Ridge, they had received 8 violation notices totaling over $600 in fines. "This has to stop," Sarah said as she opened their latest violation notice. This one was for unauthorized decorative items because they had hung a small American flag on their front porch for Memorial Day weekend. "I think we need to go to the next HOA meeting," Tom said. "Maybe if we talk to the other board members, they can help us figure out what's going on." The Pine Ridge HOA met on the first Tuesday of every month in the community clubhouse. When Tom and Sarah arrived, they were surprised to see that only about 15 people were there, including Maggie and 2 other board members. Tom raised his hand during the open comment period. "I'm Tom Mitchell, and this is my wife Sarah. We live on Pine Valley Road, and we've been having some concerns about what seems like excessive enforcement of community rules." He explained about the 8 violation notices they had received in just 2 months. Several people in the audience shook their heads sympathetically, but Maggie's expression remained stern. "Mr. Mitchell," she said when he finished speaking, "every violation notice you've received has been completely legitimate and in accordance with our community guidelines. Perhaps you should spend more time reading the materials I gave you when you moved in." "But Mrs. Thornfield," Sarah said, standing up, "some of these violations seem very minor, and we've noticed that other residents have similar issues that aren't being cited. Are you accusing me of unfair enforcement?" Maggie's voice was getting louder and sharper. "Because I take my responsibilities very seriously, and I don't appreciate having my integrity questioned by someone who has been in this community for less than 3 months. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. One of the other board members, an elderly man named Frank, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could work together to help Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell understand the guidelines better," he suggested diplomatically. "The guidelines are perfectly clear," Maggie snapped, "and they apply to everyone equally. Some residents simply require more education than others to understand their responsibilities to the community." After the meeting, several neighbors approached Tom and Sarah in the parking lot. Linda Peterson pulled Sarah aside. "I'm sorry about what happened in there," she whispered. "Maggie can be very difficult when she thinks someone is challenging her authority. My advice would be to just fix whatever violations you can and try to stay out of her way." Bob Peterson nodded in agreement. "She's been getting worse over the years. Most of us just try to avoid any problems with her. It's easier than fighting." As they drove home, Tom and Sarah felt more frustrated than ever. It was becoming clear that Maggie Thornfield was deliberately targeting them, but nobody seemed willing or able to stand up to her. "Maybe we made a mistake buying here," Sarah said quietly. "We're not giving up," Tom replied, his jaw set with determination. "We worked too hard for this place to let some power-hungry HOA president drive us away. We just need to figure out what her real problem is with us." What they didn't know was that Derek Thornfield had been driving past their cabin several times a week, imagining what it would be like to live there instead of in his mother's basement, and every time he saw their happy life in the cabin he wanted. He went home and complained to his mother about how unfair it was that they had something he deserved more than they did. Sarah was watering her small vegetable garden when she noticed a man standing at the edge of their property, taking pictures with his phone. She recognized him as Derek Thornfield, Maggie's son, but he looked different than he had during their first meeting. His hair was unwashed and messy, and his clothes looked like he had slept in them. "Can I help you with something?" Sarah called out, trying to keep her voice friendly despite feeling uncomfortable about his presence. Derek looked up from his phone with a startled expression, as if he hadn't expected to be caught. "Oh, hi, Sarah. I'm just doing some inspection work for the HOA. My mom asked me to check on a few things around the neighborhood." Sarah frowned. She had never heard of Derek being involved with HOA business, and something about his explanation didn't feel right. "What kind of things are you inspecting?" "You know, just making sure everyone is following the rules," Derek said, walking closer to their cabin. "Nice garden you've got here. Are you sure you're allowed to have vegetables? I thought there might be rules about what kinds of plants you can grow." "I checked the guidelines carefully before I planted anything," Sarah replied. "Vegetable gardens are specifically allowed as long as they're properly maintained and not visible from the street." Derek walked around to get a better view of the garden from different angles, continuing to take pictures. I don't know. This might be visible from the street if someone was really looking. And these tomato plants are getting pretty tall. There might be height restrictions." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Derek's tone was casual. but there was something threatening about the way he was examining every detail of their property. "I think you should probably talk to your mother if you have concerns," Sarah said firmly. "This is our private property, and I'm not comfortable with you taking pictures without our permission." Derek stopped taking pictures and looked directly at her. "This whole community is HOA property, technically. We all have to follow the same rules, right? Some people just need more reminding than others." After Derek left, Sarah immediately called Tom at work. "Derek Thornfield was just here taking pictures of our garden and making threats about more violations. I think we need to do something about this." That evening, Tom decided to walk over to the Thornfield house to speak with Maggie directly. The large house sat on a hill overlooking the rest of the community, with expensive landscaping and a circular driveway. Tom felt intimidated as he walked up to the front door. Maggie answered the door wearing a silk robe and looking annoyed at being disturbed. "Mr. Mitchell, what can I do for you?" "I wanted to talk to you about your son coming onto our property today," Tom said. "My wife was uncomfortable with him taking pictures and making comments about potential violations. Derek is helping me with HOA inspections," Maggie replied coldly. "He has every right to document potential rule violations on community property. But he was on our property, not community property, and he was being somewhat threatening in his comments to my wife." Maggie's expression hardened. "Are you accusing my son of threatening behavior, Mr. Mitchell? Because that's a very serious accusation to make without proof. I'm just asking that he respect our privacy and stay off our property, unless there's a legitimate HOA issue that needs to be addressed. Perhaps if you spent more time following community guidelines and less time complaining about their enforcement, you would have fewer interactions with HOA representatives," Maggie said, starting to close the door. Over the next few weeks, Derek's visits became more frequent and more intrusive. He would show up at odd times, often when Tom was at work and Sarah was alone at the cabin. Sometimes he would walk completely around their property, taking detailed photos of everything from their deck furniture to their mailbox. "I'm just doing my job," he would say whenever Sarah questioned his presence. "My mom wants thorough documentation of all potential issues." But Derek's behavior was becoming increasingly strange. He would peer through their windows if he thought no one was looking. He would pick up items from their porch like their welcome mat or a package delivery and examine them closely before putting them back. Once Sarah caught him trying to open their garden shed. "What are you doing?" she demanded, stepping out onto the porch. "Just checking to make sure you're not storing anything that violates community guidelines," Derek said, not looking embarrassed at all about being caught. "Some people keep things in their sheds that they shouldn't have." "You have no right to go through our personal belongings," Sarah said, her voice shaking with anger. "I want you to leave our property right now." Derek straightened up and looked at her with an expression that made Sarah take a step backward. "You know, you and your husband seem to think you're better than everyone else around here, moving into one of the nicest cabins in the community, acting like you own the place." "We do own the place," Sarah said. "We bought it fair and square. Did you, though?" Derek asked, moving closer to the porch. "I've been wondering how two teachers could afford a cabin like this. Maybe there's something you're not telling people about how you got the money." Sarah felt her heart racing. Derek's voice had taken on a menacing tone, and she was alone at the cabin with no neighbors in sight. "I think you should leave now," she said, backing toward the front door. "I'm just saying, some people work their whole lives and never get the kind of breaks you two seem to have gotten. It makes you wonder if they really deserve what they have." That evening, when Tom came home from work, Sarah was waiting for him with tears in her eyes. She told him about Derek's visit and the threatening things he had said. "This has gone way too far," Tom said, putting his arms around his wife. "We need to call the police." But when they called the non-emergency police line, the officer they spoke with didn't seem very concerned. "Has he actually threatened you directly or damaged any of your property?" "Not exactly," Tom admitted. "But he's trespassing and making my wife feel unsafe. If he comes back and you want him to leave, you can ask him to leave and call us if he refuses. But taking pictures from outside your house isn't illegal, and neither is working for the HOA." 2 days later, Derek showed up again, this time when both Tom and Sarah were home. Tom went outside to confront him directly. "Derek, I need you to stop coming onto our property," Tom said firmly. "You're making my wife uncomfortable, and we want you to leave us alone." Derek was standing near their creek, ostensibly taking pictures of their landscaping. He looked up at Tom with a smirk that made Tom's anger flare. "I'm doing HOA business," Derek said. "This landscaping might not be approved. And this creek runs through several properties, so it's probably community property anyway." "The creek runs through our lot, which we own," Tom replied. "And you know perfectly well that our landscaping is fine. You're just harassing us." Derek put his phone in his pocket and took a step closer to Tom. "Harassing you? I'm trying to help you understand how things work around here. Some people fit into communities like this and some people don't. You might want to think about which kind of people you are." "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means that nice people like you shouldn't have to deal with all these HOA violations and inspections," Derek said, his voice taking on a fake sympathetic tone. "If you were living somewhere more suitable for your situation, you wouldn't have these problems." Tom felt his hands clenching into fists. Derek was clearly suggesting that they should sell their cabin and move away. "This is our home, Derek. We're not going anywhere." Derek's fake sympathy disappeared immediately. "Yeah? Well, maybe you should think about it. Because people who don't belong somewhere usually end up leaving eventually, one way or another." As Derek walked away, he turned back and added, "Oh, and Tom, you might want to talk to your wife about being more respectful when I'm here doing my job. Some people might take her attitude as a sign of hostility." That night, Tom and Sarah lay in bed talking about their situation. The cabin that had once felt like a peaceful retreat now felt like a prison where they were constantly being watched and judged. "I don't understand what we did to make them hate us so much," Sarah said. "We've tried to follow all their rules, we've been polite to everyone, we keep our property nice. What do they want from us?" Tom had been thinking about the same question, and he was starting to have an uncomfortable suspicion about the answer. "I think Derek wants our cabin," he said quietly. "I think he's been trying to make us so miserable that we'll want to sell and leave." "But that's crazy," Sarah replied. "He can't just force us to sell our home because he wants it." Tom wasn't so sure about that. Derek Thornfield was clearly unstable, and his mother had the power to make their lives very difficult through the HOA. If they could manufacture enough violations and create enough problems, maybe they thought Tom and Sarah would eventually give up and move away. "What are we going to do?" Sarah asked. "We're going to document everything," Tom said. "Every time Derek comes here, every violation notice we get, every interaction with Maggie. If this gets worse, we're going to need evidence." Neither of them could sleep that night, and they had no idea that their problems with the Thornfields were just beginning. Saturday evening arrived with perfect mountain weather. Sarah and Tom had decided to grill hamburgers on their deck and enjoy the peaceful sounds of their creek. For the first time in weeks, they were trying to relax and forget about their problems with the Thornfields. Tom was flipping burgers on their small charcoal grill, while Sarah set up their outdoor table with paper plates and cold drinks. The sun was setting behind the pine trees, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink. "This is what we moved here for," Sarah said, taking a deep breath of the clean mountain air. "Just the two of us, no city noise, no traffic, no stress." "Maybe Derek has finally gotten bored with bothering us," Tom replied hopefully. "We haven't seen him in almost a week." They had spoken too soon. Just as Tom was putting the hamburgers on their plates, they heard someone shouting from the direction of their driveway. Hey, I need to talk to you people right now." Derek Thornfield came stumbling around the corner of their cabin, and it was immediately clear that he had been drinking heavily. His words were slurred, his clothes were wrinkled and dirty, and he was swaying as he walked. "Derek," Tom said, standing up from his chair. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" Derek repeated, his voice getting louder. "I want to know why you think you deserve to live in my cabin." Sarah felt her stomach clench with fear. Derek's eyes were red and angry, and his hands were clenched into fists. She had never seen him this intoxicated or this aggressive. "Derek, you're drunk," Tom said calmly. "You should go home and sleep this off." "Don't tell me what to do," Derek shouted, pointing an unsteady finger at Tom. "You don't get to tell me anything. You're living in my cabin." "This is our cabin, Derek. We bought it legally. You need to leave our property right now." Derek stumbled closer to their deck, nearly tripping over a garden hose. "You don't understand. I've been looking at this cabin for 2 years. 2 years. I was going to buy it when I got my finances figured out, and then you people swooped in and stole it from me." "We didn't steal anything," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We bought the cabin from the previous owners through a real estate agent. It was a normal sale. Normal? Derek screamed, his face turning red with rage. There's nothing normal about teachers being able to afford a place like this. You must have cheated somehow. Maybe you're dealing drugs or stealing money or something. Tom took a step toward Derek, putting himself between his wife and the drunk man. Derek, you're way out of line. You need to leave right now or we're calling the police. Go ahead and call the police, Derek yelled. Tell them about all the illegal stuff you must be doing to afford this place. Tell them about the drugs you're probably hiding in there. Derek pointed wildly toward their cabin, nearly losing his balance. I know people like you. Young people don't just save up and buy expensive cabins unless they're doing something illegal. You're probably running some kind of criminal operation out of there. Sarah stood up from her chair, her hands shaking. Derek, you're making serious accusations that are completely false. We've never done anything illegal. We saved our money for 3 years to buy this place. 3 years? Derek laughed bitterly. I've been working for 10 years and I can't even afford a decent apartment. But 2 teachers can save up enough money in 3 years to buy a mountain cabin? That's impossible unless you're lying. Tom pulled out his cell phone. I'm calling the police right now. You're trespassing and making false accusations. Fine. Call them, Derek shouted. Call them and tell them to search your cabin for whatever illegal stuff you're hiding. I bet they'll find something interesting. But as Tom started to dial, Derek's expression suddenly changed. A sly look came across his face and he pulled out his own phone. Actually, let me call them for you, Derek said, his voice taking on a dangerous tone. I think they need to know what's really going on here. Before Tom and Sarah could react, Derek had dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? They could hear the operator asking. Yes, I need police at 247 Pine Valley Road immediately, Derek shouted into his phone, loud enough for Tom and Sarah to hear every word. There are people here threatening me with weapons. They're involved in some kind of drug operation and they're trying to attack me. Derek, no! Sarah screamed. That's not true. You're lying. But Derek continued talking to the 911 operator, his voice getting more frantic and convincing. They pulled a gun on me when I asked them about the drugs they're selling. I'm afraid for my life. Please send help right away. Tom tried to grab Derek's phone, but Derek stumbled backward, still talking to the operator. They're trying to attack me right now. Please hurry. The man has a weapon and they're both acting very aggressive. Derek, you're lying, Tom shouted. We don't have any weapons. We don't have any drugs. Tell them the truth. Derek ended the phone call and looked at Tom and Sarah with a satisfied smirk. The police are coming, he said. Now we'll see what they find when they search your precious cabin. Sarah was crying now, terrified of what was happening. Why are you doing this to us? We never did anything to hurt you. You stole my cabin. Derek yelled again. You took the place where I should be living and now you act like you deserve it more than I do. We didn't steal anything, Tom replied angrily. The cabin was for sale. Anyone could have bought it. If you wanted it so badly, why didn't you make an offer? Because I couldn't afford it then. Derek screamed. But I was going to figure something out. I was going to get a loan or ask my mom to help me or something. But you people had to come along and ruin everything. The sound of sirens was getting closer and Derek's demeanor suddenly changed again. He sat down on their deck steps and put his head in his hands, trying to look like a victim. Derek, Sarah pleaded, please tell the police the truth when they get here. We never threatened you. We don't have any weapons or drugs. You know that's not true. Derek looked up at her with cold, calculating eyes. I know that you people don't belong here, he said quietly. And after tonight, maybe you'll finally understand that. As the sirens got louder, Tom put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. It's going to be okay, he whispered. The police will figure out what's really happening here. But Tom wasn't really sure about that. Derek had sounded very convincing on his 911 call, and the police would be arriving expecting to find a dangerous situation with weapons and drugs. Tom and Sarah had no idea how they were going to explain what was really happening. Through the trees, they could see the flashing red and blue lights getting closer. Their peaceful Saturday evening had turned into a nightmare, and they knew their lives in Pine Ridge were about to change forever. Derek sat on their steps, no longer shouting or stumbling. He looked almost sober now, as if the approaching police cars had cleared his head. He was quietly planning what he would tell the officers when they arrived. My son deserves that cabin, he muttered under his breath, practicing the words he planned to say. My son deserves that cabin more than you do. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the peaceful mountain evening, as 6 police cars arrived at the Mitchells' cabin within minutes of each other. Red and blue lights flashed across the trees, and the quiet neighborhood suddenly looked like a crime scene. Officer Rodriguez was the first to approach the scene, his hand resting on his weapon as he had been trained to do when responding to calls involving potential violence and weapons. Behind him, 5 other officers spread out around the property just as they had been taught when dealing with dangerous situations. Police, everyone stay where you are and keep your hands visible, Officer Rodriguez called out as he approached the deck where Tom, Sarah, and Derek were standing. Tom immediately raised his hands above his head. Officer, there's been a misunderstanding. We're the homeowners, and this man called in a false report. Nobody move or speak unless I ask you to, the officer replied firmly. We received a 911 call reporting weapons and drug activity at this address. We need to sort out what's happening here. Derek, who had been sitting calmly on the deck steps, suddenly jumped up and ran toward the police officers. Thank God you're here, he shouted, his voice full of fear and relief. These people threatened me with a gun when I asked them about the drugs they're selling. Officer Rodriguez studied Derek carefully. The man's speech was slurred, his clothes were disheveled, and he smelled strongly of alcohol. But he was also clearly upset and seemed genuinely frightened. Sir, have you been drinking tonight? The officer asked Derek. Maybe a little, Derek admitted. But that doesn't change what happened. They pulled a gun on me and told me to get off their property or they would hurt me. Sarah couldn't stay quiet any longer. Officer, that's completely untrue. We've never owned a gun in our lives. This man came onto our property drunk and started making false accusations about us. Ma'am, please remain calm, Officer Rodriguez said. We're going to get everyone's story, but I need you to stay quiet while I'm talking to this gentleman. More police officers were arriving, and neighbors were starting to come out of their houses to see what was happening. The peaceful Pine Ridge community had never seen anything like this before. What's your name, sir? Officer Rodriguez asked Derek. Derek Thornfield. I live up the hill with my mother. She's the HOA president here. Derek pointed toward Maggie's house. I was doing some inspection work for the HOA when these people started acting aggressive toward me. And what kind of inspection work were you doing? Derek's story started to change slightly. Well, we've been having some concerns about this property. Some of the neighbors have reported suspicious activity. People coming and going at odd hours, strange smells, that kind of thing. Tom felt his anger rising. Officer, none of that is true. We're both teachers. We've been living here for 3 months and we've never had any visitors except for our families. Just then, a black SUV came speeding up the mountain road with its headlights flashing. It pulled into the Mitchells' driveway and Maggie Thornfield jumped out wearing a bathrobe and slippers. Officers, she called out as she hurried toward the group. I'm Margaret Thornfield, the president of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. What's happening here? Ma'am, we received a 911 call about a potential weapons and drug situation, Officer Rodriguez explained. Are you related to Derek Thornfield? He's my son, Maggie said, immediately rushing over to Derek and putting her arm around him. Derek, are you okay? What did these people do to you? Mom, I was just doing the HOA inspection like you asked me to, and they completely lost it, Derek said, his voice shaking as if he were traumatized. The man pulled out a gun and told me to get off their property. I think they're hiding drugs in that cabin. Officer Rodriguez was beginning to notice some inconsistencies in Derek's story. The young man claimed to have been threatened with a weapon, but he didn't seem genuinely scared. He also kept changing small details about what had happened. Mrs. Thornfield, the officer said to Maggie, does your son regularly do inspection work for the HOA? Maggie hesitated for just a moment before answering. Yes, of course. Derek helps me with various community duties. We've been having some concerns about this particular property. What kind of concerns? Well, Maggie said, looking toward Tom and Sarah with obvious dislike. These residents have been very difficult since they moved in. Multiple HOA violations, hostile attitude toward community leadership, suspicious behavior. Officer Martinez, who had been quietly observing the whole scene, stepped forward. Ma'am, what kind of suspicious behavior are you referring to specifically? Maggie seemed caught off guard by the question. Oh, just general suspicious activity. Coming and going at odd times, not being very social with the other residents. Ma'am, can you be more specific? Because we're investigating serious accusations of weapons and drug activity. Sarah couldn't help herself. Officer, the suspicious behavior she's talking about is us going to work and coming home from work. We're both teachers, We leave for work at 7:30 in the morning and come home at 4:00 in the afternoon. Officer Rodriguez was getting a clearer picture of the situation. He walked over to Derek, who was leaning against his mother for support. Derek, I need you to tell me exactly what happened here tonight. Start from the beginning. Derek's story became more confused as he tried to tell it again. I was doing my inspection work and they came outside and started yelling at me. Then the man went inside and came back out with a gun. What kind of gun? I don't know. A black gun. A pistol, I think. Where did he point the gun? At me, right at me. I was scared for my life. Officer Martinez had been walking around the deck area while Derek told his story. Sir, if someone pointed a gun at you on this deck, where were you standing when it happened? Derek looked confused. Over there by the grill. And where were they standing? Right there by the table. Officer Martinez looked at the setup. The grill and the table were only about 6 feet apart. If someone had actually pointed a gun in this small space, there would have been no reason for Derek to call 911 from the same location. A truly frightened person would have run away immediately. Derek, Officer Rodriguez said, I notice you smell like alcohol. How much have you had to drink tonight? Just a couple of beers, Derek said, but his mother quickly interrupted. Derek has been under a lot of stress lately, Maggie said. He's been helping me with difficult HOA situations, and it's been very challenging for him. Officer Rodriguez had been a police officer for 15 years, and he had developed a good sense for when people weren't telling the truth. Derek's story had too many inconsistencies, and his behavior didn't match someone who had genuinely been threatened with a weapon. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, he said, turning to Tom and Sarah, do you own any firearms? No, sir, Tom replied immediately. We've never owned a gun. We don't even like guns. Would you mind if we took a look inside your cabin to verify that? Of course not, Sarah said. Please look anywhere you want. We have nothing to hide. 2 officers went inside the cabin and did a quick search. They found no weapons, no drugs, and nothing that looked suspicious in any way. The cabin was clean, neat, and exactly what you would expect from a young couple's weekend retreat. While the officers were inside, Derek started getting more agitated. They must have hidden the stuff somewhere else, he insisted. Maybe in their shed or their car or something. But Officer Rodriguez was no longer taking Derek's accusations seriously. The young man was clearly intoxicated, his story kept changing, and there was no evidence to support any of his claims. Derek, the officer said firmly, I think you need to calm down and think carefully about what you're saying. Making false reports to police is a serious crime. Derek's face went pale, and he suddenly seemed to realize that his plan wasn't working the way he had hoped. I wasn't making a false report, he said weakly. I really thought they had a gun. But now you're not sure? Derek looked at his mother, who was watching the conversation with growing concern. I was scared. Maybe I misunderstood what I saw. Officer Rodriguez nodded. He had heard enough to understand what was really happening. This was a neighborhood dispute that had gotten out of hand, not a genuine emergency involving weapons and drugs. As the other officers finished their search and confirmed that there was no evidence of any criminal activity, Derek slumped down on the deck steps and put his head in his hands. His elaborate plan to get the police to arrest Tom and Sarah had completely backfired, and now he was in serious trouble himself. Detective Lisa Chen arrived at the Pine Ridge community the following Monday morning to begin what would become one of the most thorough investigations in the county's recent history. The false 911 call had triggered an automatic investigation, and what she found would shock everyone involved. Detective Chen started by interviewing Tom and Sarah Mitchell in their cabin. They sat at their kitchen table with a thick folder of documents they had been collecting for months. We started keeping records after the harassment began, Tom explained, opening the folder. Every violation notice every time Derek came onto our property, every interaction with Maggie Thornfield. Sarah spread out dozens of photos on the table. I started taking pictures of Derek whenever he showed up here. At first it was just to document his trespassing, but then his behavior got so strange that I wanted evidence. Detective Chen examined the photos carefully. They showed Derek peering through windows, going through their garbage, trying to open their storage shed, and taking pictures of every inch of their property. This level of surveillance goes way beyond normal HOA business, the detective noted. How often was he coming here? At least 3 times a week for the past 2 months, Sarah replied. Sometimes more. He would show up when Tom was at work and I was here alone, which made me very uncomfortable. Detective Chen made detailed notes about the timeline of events. The pattern was clear. The harassment had started within weeks of the Mitchells moving in and had escalated steadily over time. Did Derek ever explain why he was so interested in your property specifically? She asked. Tom nodded. He made several comments about deserving to live here more than we did. He seemed to think that because his mother was the HOA president, he had some kind of claim to our cabin. The detective's next stop was the Pine Ridge HOA office, where she requested all records related to the Mitchell property. What she found was remarkable. In the 3 months since Tom and Sarah had moved in, they had received more violation notices than any other resident had received in an entire year. This is highly unusual, the HOA secretary, Mrs. Williams, admitted privately to Detective Chen. I've been working here for 8 years, and I've never seen anything like this level of enforcement against a single property. Mrs. Williams pulled out violation records for other residents in the community. Many had bird feeders, colorful doormats, and cars parked the same way as the Mitchells, but none of them had received violation notices. Between you and me, Mrs. Williams whispered, Maggie has been acting very strangely about the Mitchell property. She drives by there almost daily and takes pictures. She's never shown this much interest in any other property in the community. Detective Chen's investigation took a dramatic turn when she decided to check social media accounts. Derek Thornfield had been very active on Facebook and Instagram, and he had not been careful about what he posted. The posts painted a disturbing picture of Derek's mindset over the past several months. In March, right after the Mitchells had moved in, Derek had posted, "Some people get all the luck while others work hard and get nothing. Not fair." In April, "Been looking at this perfect cabin for months. Should be mine, but some people swooped in and stole it from me." In May, "Working with Mom to solve a neighborhood problem. Some people don't belong in nice communities." In June, "Getting tired of people who think they're better than everyone else. Time to show them how things really work around here." But the most damning posts were from just a few days before the false 911 call. Derek had written, "Almost ready to get rid of the annoying neighbors. Mom has been helping me document all their violations. Soon they'll realize they don't belong here." And then the day before the incident, "Tomorrow night everything changes. Going to make sure the neighbors understand they need to leave. Can't wait to finally live in that cabin where I belong." Detective Chen immediately obtained warrants to preserve all of Derek's social media accounts as evidence. She also requested security camera footage from neighboring properties. The Petersons' security system had captured several disturbing incidents that Tom and Sarah hadn't even known about. The footage showed Derek coming onto their property late at night when no one was home, trying to look through windows and even attempting to pick the lock on their front door. This footage shows clear evidence of attempted breaking and entering. Detective Chen noted as she reviewed the videos with the Petersons, "Why didn't you report this?" Bob Peterson looked embarrassed. "We didn't want to get involved in a neighborhood dispute. We figured it was HOA business and not our place to interfere." The security footage also revealed that Derek had been following a pattern of surveillance and harassment that was far more extensive than anyone had realized. He had been documenting the Mitchells' daily routines, photographing their car license plates, and even going through their trash to look for evidence of wrongdoing. Detective Chen's next interview was with Maggie Thornfield. The HOA president arrived at the police station wearing an expensive suit and accompanied by a lawyer, which immediately raised red flags. "Mrs. Thornfield, were you aware that your son was conducting surveillance on the Mitchell property?" "Derek was helping me with legitimate HOA enforcement activities," Maggie replied stiffly. "Were you aware that he was trespassing on their property at night and attempting to break into their home?" Maggie's lawyer whispered something in her ear before she answered. "I was not aware of any inappropriate behavior." Detective Chen showed Maggie some of Derek's social media posts. "Your son posted several times about working with Mom to solve the neighbor problem. What did he mean by that?" "I have no idea what he meant by those posts," Maggie claimed, but her voice was shaking. "Mrs. Thornfield, we have documentation showing that you issued more violation notices to the Mitchell property in 3 months than most residents receive in several years. Can you explain that?" Maggie's lawyer advised her not to answer any more questions, but Detective Chen had already gathered enough evidence to understand what had been happening. The investigation revealed a deliberate campaign of harassment designed to force Tom and Sarah Mitchell to sell their cabin and move away. Maggie had used her position as HOA president to create a hostile environment, while Derek had escalated to stalking, trespassing, and eventually filing false police reports. Detective Chen also discovered that Derek had been researching the value of the Mitchell cabin and had even contacted real estate agents about upcoming opportunities in the Pine Ridge community. It appears that Derek Thornfield believed he could force the Mitchells to sell their cabin at a loss, and then he would be able to purchase it himself, Detective Chen wrote in her report. The most disturbing discovery came when Detective Chen searched Derek's room in his mother's basement. She found hundreds of photographs of the Mitchell cabin, taken from different angles and at different times of day. Derek had also created detailed maps of their property and written notes about their daily schedules. In a notebook, Derek had written out a plan for getting rid of the neighbors. The plan included escalating HOA violations, making them feel unsafe, and eventually creating a situation that would force them to leave permanently. The final entry in the notebook, written the day of the false 911 call, said, "Tonight I make the call that will end this once and for all. They'll be arrested and then everyone will know they don't belong here. The cabin will finally be mine." Detective Chen had never seen such a clear example of a premeditated harassment campaign. Derek Thornfield had documented his own criminal behavior in detail, making the case against him remarkably easy to prove. When she presented her findings to the district attorney's office, they immediately decided to pursue the most serious charges possible. Derek would face multiple felony counts, including filing false police reports, stalking, harassment, trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, and conspiracy. Maggie Thornfield would also face charges for her role in the harassment campaign. As HOA president, she had abused her power to target the Mitchells unfairly, and her coordination with Derek's activities made her a co-conspirator in the scheme. This case shows what can happen when someone becomes obsessed with something they can't have. Detective Chen explained to her supervisor. Derek Thornfield convinced himself that he deserved the Mitchells' cabin more than they did, and he was willing to commit serious crimes to try to get it. The evidence was overwhelming, and both Derek and Maggie Thornfield would soon discover that their plan to force out the Mitchell family had backfired in the worst possible way. The courtroom was packed on the day of Derek Thornfield's sentencing. Tom and Sarah Mitchell sat in the front row, holding hands as they waited to see justice finally served after months of harassment and fear. Behind them sat many of their Pine Ridge neighbors, including the Petersons and several other residents who had come forward during the investigation with their own stories of Maggie Thornfield's abuse of power. Judge Patricia Hernandez had been on the bench for 20 years, and she had seen many cases involving neighborhood disputes and HOA conflicts. But she had never seen anything quite like the evidence that had been presented in the Thornfield case. Derek sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jail uniform. He had been in custody for 3 months since his arrest, after being denied bail due to the judge's concern that he might continue to harass the Mitchell family. His appearance had changed dramatically since the night of his arrest. He looked thin and pale, and his previous arrogance had been replaced by obvious fear about his future. His mother, Maggie, sat in the gallery behind him, wearing a black dress and looking much older than her 62 years. She had already pleaded guilty to lesser charges and received a sentence of 2 years probation and removal from all HOA positions. The stress of the legal proceedings and the shame of having her role in the harassment campaign exposed to the entire community had taken a visible toll on her. The prosecution had presented an overwhelming case against Derek. District Attorney Robert Martinez had methodically laid out the evidence of Derek's escalating campaign of harassment, stalking, and ultimately filing false police reports. Your Honor, D.A. Martinez had argued during the trial, this case represents one of the most deliberate and malicious harassment campaigns our office has ever prosecuted. Mr. Thornfield didn't just make a mistake or lose his temper. He planned and executed a months-long campaign designed to terrorize 2 innocent people into giving up their home. The evidence had been devastating. Derek's own social media posts provided a clear timeline of his growing obsession with the Mitchell cabin. The security camera footage showed him trespassing and attempting to break into their home. The false 911 call had been recorded, capturing Derek's lies about weapons and drug activity. Perhaps most damning of all was Derek's notebook, where he had written out his plans to get rid of the neighbors and claim their cabin for himself. Derek's defense attorney had tried to argue that his client was struggling with mental health issues and alcohol problems, but Judge Hernandez was not impressed by these excuses. Mr. Thornfield, the judge had said during the trial, "Your behavior shows clear planning and deliberation. This was not the result of mental illness or substance abuse. This was a calculated campaign to steal someone else's property through intimidation and false accusations." Now, 3 months after Derek's conviction on multiple felony charges, Judge Hernandez was ready to hand down his sentence. "Derek Thornfield, please stand," she commanded. Derek stood up slowly, his legs shaking as he faced the judge who would determine his future. Judge Hernandez looked down at Derek with an expression of deep disapproval. "Mr. Thornfield, in my 20 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a clear case of entitlement and malicious intent. You decided that you deserved something that belonged to someone else, and you were willing to commit serious crimes to try to take it from them." She paused to look at the thick file of evidence on her desk. "The court has reviewed extensive evidence of your harassment campaign against Tom and Sarah Mitchell. You stalked them, trespassed on their property, attempted to break into their home, and finally filed false police reports that could have resulted in serious harm to innocent people." Derek's attorney had asked the judge to consider his client's lack of a serious criminal history and his struggles with unemployment and depression. But Judge Hernandez was focused on the severity of Derek's actions and their impact on the victims. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell," the judge said, turning to address Tom and Sarah directly, "I want you to know that the court recognizes the trauma and fear that Mr. Thornfield caused you. Your right to enjoy your home peacefully is fundamental, and Mr. Thornfield violated that right in the most serious way possible." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as the judge continued. "Mr. Thornfield, your actions went far beyond a simple neighborhood dispute. You filed false reports claiming that innocent people had threatened you with weapons and were involved in drug activity. Do you understand how dangerous that was? Police officers responded to your call prepared for a potentially deadly situation. The Mitchell family could have been seriously injured or killed because of your lies." Derek's head hung down as he listened to the judge's words. "Furthermore," Judge Hernandez continued, "your months of stalking and harassment created a climate of fear that no person should have to endure in their own home. You turned what should have been a peaceful mountain retreat into a nightmare for two hard-working young people who had done nothing wrong except purchase a home that you wanted for yourself." The judge reviewed each of Derek's charges and the maximum penalties allowed under state law. For the charge of filing false police reports, you could receive up to 5 years in prison. For stalking, up to 4 years. For harassment, up to 2 years. For attempted breaking and entering, up to 3 years. For conspiracy, up to 3 years. Derek's knees buckled slightly as he realized he could be facing 17 years in prison. "However," the judge continued, "the court recognizes that many of these charges stem from the same course of conduct. After careful consideration of all the evidence and the impact on the victims, I hereby sentence you to 10 years in the state penitentiary." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Derek's mother began crying loudly, and Derek himself seemed to sway as if he might faint. "This sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes and serves as a message that this kind of deliberate harassment and false reporting will not be tolerated," Judge Hernandez explained. "You will serve a minimum of 7 years before being eligible for parole." Derek was immediately taken into custody by court officers. As he was led away in handcuffs, he turned back toward his mother one last time. "I'm sorry, Mom," he called out. "I just wanted the cabin so badly." His words seemed to sum up the entire tragic case. Derek Thornfield had destroyed his life and traumatized innocent people because he couldn't accept that he wasn't entitled to something that belonged to someone else. After the sentencing, Tom and Sarah spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. "We're relieved that this ordeal is finally over," Tom said. "We just wanted to live peacefully in our home, and we hope that our case will encourage other people to stand up against harassment and abuse." Sarah added, "No one should have to go through what we went through. We're grateful to Detective Chen and the district attorney's office for taking our case seriously and holding Derek accountable for his actions." The Pine Ridge Mountain community underwent significant changes following the Thornfield case. A new HOA board was elected, with stronger oversight and clearer guidelines for enforcement activities. The community also implemented new rules requiring background checks for board members and establishing an appeals process for residents who felt they were being unfairly targeted. Tom and Sarah Mitchell finally got to enjoy the peaceful mountain life they had worked so hard to achieve. They installed additional security cameras and changed their locks, but they refused to let Derek's harassment drive them away from their dream home. "This cabin represents everything we worked for," Sarah explained to a local newspaper reporter. "We saved for 3 years to buy it, and we weren't going to let someone else's sense of entitlement take it away from us." 6 months after Derek's sentencing, Tom and Sarah hosted their first annual Pine Ridge Community Barbecue in their backyard. Over 50 neighbors attended, including many who had been afraid to speak out against Maggie Thornfield's harsh HOA enforcement during her years in power. "It feels like our community is finally healing," said Bob Peterson, enjoying a hamburger on the same deck where Derek had made his false accusations. "People aren't afraid to talk to their neighbors anymore, or worry about getting violation notices for every little thing." The new HOA president, Jennifer Walsh, had instituted a completely different approach to community management. Instead of looking for violations and problems, the new board focused on organizing social events and maintaining common areas. Violation notices were now rare and only issued for genuine safety or maintenance concerns. The Thornfield case taught us that HOA power can be abused when there's no oversight, Jennifer explained to the group gathered in the Mitchells' backyard. "We've put new systems in place to make sure something like this never happens again." Detective Lisa Chen, who had been invited as a guest of honor, spoke to the crowd about the importance of documenting harassment and standing up against bullies. "Tom and Sarah's case shows why it's so important to keep records and not stay silent when someone is targeting you," she said. "Their documentation made it possible to prove what was really happening and hold Derek accountable for his crimes." As the evening wound down, Tom and Sarah stood on their deck looking out over their property.